Hello, my name is Richard Hayward. This is assignment 1 and my presentation is on metacognition. Contents of the presentation are an introduction, what is metacognition, my beliefs and why I've chosen this topic, main body, strengths and limitations with some practical examples, followed by a conclusion. What is metacognition? Metacognition is a cognitive theory. Most of the early ideas originated from John Flavel. To differentiate from cognitivity, which is the current of information, metacognitivity is being aware of this current and monitoring and reviewing that information. Metacognitivity can be understood as thinking about thinking. Here's a visual example of some of the practices that go into metacognitive thinking. Planning, monitoring, problem solving, and evaluation. This was taken from Van der Grift, 2011. So, my personal beliefs. Let's try teaching children how to think instead of what to think. I remember going through primary school and even early secondary school, my lessons being very content driven rather than learning to think for ourselves. It was teacher led. I think a great sense of achievement can be found from learning for yourself, problem solving for yourself, and I think it's a very important life skill that should be learned at primary school, so you can take it forward and build on it in secondary and university. Okay, so the first practical example is a grade 2 science project from Larkin, 2010. Students were asked to fill water bottles with rice to different amounts, and then were challenged to roll those bottles down the hill after predicting which would roll the furthest. After they conducted the activity, they were asked whether they were right or wrong, and to evaluate why they came up with those reasons in the first place. So this was an example of a metacognitive process going on, but it was very teacher-led. So throughout the lesson, there was intervention, guiding, questioning from the teacher. This led me to think, was Jean Piaget correct? Does the brain not reflect before 11 years of age? This is when it leaves the concrete stage of operations. My second lesson example is a grade 5 math project, also from Larkin, 2010. A group of students were asked to analyse 12 rocks and place them in size order. This was something at face value that seemed to be relatively easy. However, when the group could not decide on the correct order, because of the different shapes and sizes of the rocks, they were asked to divide in half, with half the group working out how you measure different shapes and sizes, and the other half to track back the steps they'd taken, decide if their original strategy was sound, and if there was anything they could do differently. So this is another example of metacognitive thinking, with some teacher questioning, but less involvement and a much higher order of thinking. So the author found that at grade 5, the thinking process had changed from grade 2. So the third activity, practical lesson, is a maths problem, but it was from Queenstown University study by Goose and No Date. It was a problem that the group of students could not solve. They were encouraged to think metacognitively, review and analyse what they've been doing, but every time it led to a lack of progress. The author deemed this to be metacognitive failure. So it didn't matter what they did, they could not solve the problem, led to frustrations. There was, however, no teacher intervention. So a teacher could have stepped in and maybe corrected one of the faults in the process, but didn't. So this is where the metacognitive failure came from. So I had some additional findings. It's a very hard activity to quantify and assess. It needs a deal of confidence from the teacher to allow the process to flow. Some primary school teachers can be sceptical about spending time on it if it's not going to be assessed. Also, children, especially young children, like to do things quickly. So they eat their lunch quickly, run outside and play with their friends. It's not sitting down and thinking reflectively is not something that would come very easy to them. Metacognitive practices, however, do help understanding of strengths and weaknesses. If you know your strengths and weaknesses, you can put in place strategies to build on your lack of knowledge or lack of ability in certain areas. Critical thinking is required for the 21st century. The Australian Curriculum Board note. And as a result of that, it is a general concept that runs through the current curriculum through the different strands of learning. So, to conclude, learning for yourself and independent thought sits well with my beliefs. It's something that should be learned and developed earlier in school, so that when you go to high school and university, you have that ability to analyse and look at what you've done and come up with conclusions yourself and improvements. I think at a certain age, though, teacher delivery is key to success, as we saw in the 3 examples, dependent on how much intervention was the success of the lesson. So being able to let students think for themselves, but also step in at certain points, made the lessons outcomes different. So I do look forward to using metacognitive practice in my teaching, but I'm aware a great deal of confidence is required to be able to step back and let students make their own mistakes. And I think that will come from experience of classroom practice. So that's my presentation. Thank you for listening.